This is a topic that's very broad and slightly different than a lot of the talks here. A lot of the talks here get into the weeds and give you a how-to, maybe a workshop into things. This is more of I'm a very conceptual person, and I like getting into the more, I guess, ambiguity of things and trying to flush that out with organizations. Because I think before you get into any of those exercises and maybe some of those other talks that Matt had up here earlier, that you gotta get a good handle on product thinking. And product thinking isn't just the UX stuff that you and I are comfortable with every day. It's slightly a wider umbrella than that, and we're gonna be talking about that today. Cool? All right, so getting into this. I know this slide looks a little bit haphazard. That's because I did it walking in. I have quite a stiff commute, and on my way over here, I was listening to a much smarter person talk about UX in a much smarter way, and they actually covered my next slide way better than I did. The only problem is it was a podcast. I couldn't hear, or I couldn't see what they were talking about. They just talked about this like really cool graphic that explained this whole slide rule that I'm going to explain to you, and then I pulled it up and it's just text, which I feel like is UX like a no-no. I don't know why they did that. But here's the cool thing about this graph. If you're able to read it, probably can't, I'm going to explain it to you. On the very bottom is kind of companies that perhaps have never even heard of what you and I know as conversation, common stuff that we talk about all the time. They're very bureaucratic. Maybe they have like just a lot of political things going on, but it's super hard to explain UX to them. Whereas on the top, every single decision, small, big, medium, large, doesn't matter, is all about the user and data and driven by data and all of that. So they were talking about this. I got really excited because that's kind of what I'm talking about today. And it's a little bit just text heavy, but it's a good diagram if you get into the weeds of it and start reading it. And that actually makes this one a little bit better. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I've worked at, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I feel like the whole sliding rule. Everything from like too bureaucratic to do anything to let's not move until we have like 1 million data points to convince everybody on the same page, let's do that. How many people here are working in UX right now? I know it sounds like a stupid question, but some people come just to learn. Half. That's good. So I've worked on this whole like continuum of scale where people haven't had anything. So I wanted to kind of get into like what that means specifically. So some people, maybe they have restrictions around how much user testing they can do. There's legality around it. But some people, they don't even know who their users are. So maybe they do user testing, but it's on the wrong people. It doesn't go so well. Maybe you do a ton of work before you even start a project, but other people don't even do it until it's way too late. Doing one of those right now. Some have developers. They don't really have, they have UX people, but their developers actually are the ones that go out and do the testing. There are people that have 50-member product teams that are dedicated to nothing but product. And they have product managers and UX designers, directors of strategy, and then other people, I walk in with my UX title, they don't know what that is, right? There's this whole spectrum. Some people have UX teams and they actually do UI, but they don't want to say that, and it's this whole like hush-hush thing. Other people, they create from scratch every single time. Other people actually have libraries or a design system that they reference. The point being is that there's companies out there that have got it right, and you and I have drunk the Kool-Aid right? And we know it to be the way to go. It's a super smart way to go. And other companies are either refusing to do it or they know how to do it, but they're not really sure how to implement it. So kind of the results of that, right? The reason why that shift is happening is, let's kind of use an example here. So here is a screenshot from QuickBooks. This is where, if you're a freelancer, you would kind of put in your hours, okay? Because back in the day, somebody up at the top of the ladder said, these are the list of requirements we need for our platform. If you can draw us some sort of wireframe for that, let's move on that. And then they do that, they hand it to the next person, so on and so forth, and then you have QuickBooks. And if you're QuickBooks and you don't have anybody competing against you, or if they do, they have the same processes, you're probably gonna be pretty successful. So that's how it worked in the past. And now we have things like Harvest. How many people have heard of Harvest? Does anyone use that here? A couple hands, a little bit. Well, they do timesheets. They have decided we're just going to zero in on that. We're going to figure out who those personas are. We're going to sit down with them. You can see there's a bunch of people standing in front of a whiteboard. There's probably developers and a heavy mix of, there's a plethora of skills up there, right? All having the same conversation. They're all marching to the beat of the same drum. And as you can see, it kind of gives you this much more friendly user experience. And if you look back at QuickBooks, as a user, which one are you going to pay for? So that's kind of the old versus new. And in order to get to that, I want to dare say a very super generic, maybe mindless thing to say. And if you want to read along with me, it's if you build something your users like, need, and are willing to pay for, you will be successful. Right? That's really all this is. We like to overcomplicate it because there's a ton of nuances to get right, but at the end of the day, it's this, right? So getting into this a little bit, if you build something, how many people work for a company that's building something right now? Okay, makes sense. If your users like and need it, how many people are verifying that their users are liking and needing it? Right? Yeah, we're all over the place as we discussed. And that they're willing to pay for, or there's different models here, right? Depending, sometimes there's sponsors or advertisers, what have you, but there's like a mechanism to make it viable, right? So that gets into our next slide, which is this one. So there's the 3 pillars of product. These are them. There's the viability of the market, which means the selling part, right? Can it be sold? The desirability of their users, which go team, that's us. And the feasibility from your team, which is probably your developers / designers, whoever's who's actually building your product. Those are your 3 pillars, and they work perfectly with the statement that we looked at before. So now that we know the 3 pillars, we're done. Everyone have pizza. Or how do we apply this to your workflow? Because even if we looked at that sliding rule, if it was a sliding rule, the rainbow chart that we saw that was just text, if there's a ruler of like totally bureaucratic to we only work on data, how, and everybody here is somewhere on that ruler, how do we get closer to the point where we're actually we're on the right side of the scale there? So let's use a kind of a model here and list out some positions. Now, these aren't just UX specific, they're all over your company. And I put loose definitions. There might not be the best definitions. I'm kind of just using this as a model. But if we're using this as a model, we're taking UX design, that's obvious, they design for products. The customer CX designer, they kind of, now this is a really loose definition, they design the experience outside or like before you get to the product. The product manager gets the viability, feasibility, and desirability of the feature or product. The market, and this is kind of a weird one, is the product's go-to market narrative. I don't know if you've ever heard it defined like that, but I kind of like to think about it like that. Because as a product person, if I get done with a feature and I know it's going to go to market, my cheerleader is marketing. They get to be my little, what are those things called? The megaphones. They get to like speak from the soapbox and tell everybody what the product is. Same with copywriters, right? They decide the voice of your product. Engineering, very important. They build your product. It's super important. UI designers, more aesthetic presentation, brand feel. The accountants. Yes, even accounting is part of product, because if you think about it, they're the financial viability of your product, right? They are supporting product too. The business strategy, they have the strategy to predict, hopefully, the viability of your product. And then the stakeholders are who define the KPI, or like they do, I don't know what they do, they drink coffee, who knows what those guys do. But the point is, this is our model, okay? And if we take a step back, there's kind of themes that start forming here that support our pillars. There they go. So remember those 3 pillars? If you kind of look at these loose definitions, they kind of start falling into those pillars, the desirability, feasibility, and desirability. There we go. So the point is, you can list whatever role you want to, and if you start thinking about the different roles in your company, you could start to kind of define what those are and where those might fall within the paragraph, the model of the 3 pillars. So another way to do this is to think about a puzzle. And this is a little bit outside of the 3 pillars that we talked about. But hang with me here. If you put your users first, and they're kind of the first step of your process, who are we designing for? And then we go to the company's strategy. That should probably come from maybe the feature of the product, like where that's going, and then the deliverable, which should align with company goals. And then if we figure out there's puzzle pieces missing here. So this is kind of taking us from that first, the one side of the scale of like, they always work this way, onto the other side. So what I want to take a look at here is KPIs. Who knows what a KPI is? A few hands. Key performance indicators. These are little tools that you can use to attach onto your feature or product to make sure it's aligning with those company goals. A KPI should be measurable. We're gonna use an example in a second because it's gonna be way clearer, because man, do I even rant about KPIs. The vision, like yours and mine when we're about to go and design a product, whatever we're thinking in our heads should align with company strategy. So as you're thinking about your vision, don't just be like, it's mine, it's the best, I just need to verify with my friends, the users here, and then we're rocking. It should align with your company's strategy because that's your viability mechanism. And then the problems, obviously, should be your users' problems. They shouldn't be like my grandma's problems if she's not one of my users. I can't go solve her tea problem if we're building, what's something not tea? We're a coffee company or something. Like it needs to align with the user specifically. So if you think about it in puzzle pieces and where you fit within the mechanisms of company and that very first overly simplified statement, you can start understanding like how this is important and what this means. Because if you come to every single one of these next 12 meetups, which I encourage you to do because they're going to be awesome, if you're not thinking like this, all the skills you're learning kind of are without guidance, right? You got to make sure that whatever cool tools you're learning here, that they're aligning with your company, because you could be a better hero that way. You're more aligned. Okay, now we're going to build out a simple model. And I just started a new gig, so see if you can guess where it is. I'm pretty excited about it. So we're gonna build my vision. Let's see what my vision. My vision is that my friend, let's call him Mickey, He's got a bunch of friends, and he's got a problem because as guests come to the park, like they really want a picture with Mickey, and Mickey has big fat hands now, and he has a hard time using his phone to take a picture, a selfie with the guests because his hands are too big, and then all of his friends have the same problem. So we're going to use that as our model, okay? Our vision is to help Mickey and friends. Welcome to my world. This is where I live in now. Our product will solve target audience. Who's our target? Who's our target? Mickey and friends. Come on, you guys. This is Mickey and friends. Super easy. The problem of the big mitted hands, right? By giving them, I don't know, what's our vision? What's our strategy here? Let's say an app with giant buttons on it. Let's just say, we'll start with that. We will know if our product works when we see, and this is where I think companies kind of screw it up, because they forget the sentence and how important it is. And this is where my KPI rant comes into play. So we will know if it works when we see. Some people say once it's delivered, we got it. I would say when we see a KPI that has met its mark. So to overly simplify this again, let's say Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, all right, there are 3 Mickey friends, need to be able to have taken 50 pictures by the end of June. Let's say we're already released this. We don't have to do everything by then. So that's a number, right? It's a hard number that we have to meet. So now that we've taken everything we've thought of up until now and we align it with this kind of mechanism, this way of thinking, we should have the autonomy to move forward because we have been given the marching orders. We're not told how to get there, we're just told what the target is. They're basically pointing to the bullseye. It's the equivalent, a KPI for me is like if you're gonna try to learn archery, but you go there and there's no targets. And they're like, good luck, you can do it. So this is kind of a shout out to probably nobody here, but for managers that are trying to manage us, like the people that run product, I would say because I would feel the same way. If my job is on the line and I'm responsible for the work that somebody else is cranking out, I would kind of want to be trying to sway them one way or another too. I want my opinions in the pot as well. But what a KPI can offer you is the ability to kind of relax and sit back and say, you know what, as long as Mickey is able to take those 50 pictures, we're good, right? I'm still good. And what's really cool about that is I, as a product designer, get the autonomy to make executive decisions as far as product goes. So I'm able to reach to that KPI, which enables the company to move forward successfully. Now, granted, the KPI should align with that puzzle piece, right? It should go with company strategy. It should enable you to successfully build on the viability of the product. KPIs are essentially a way to predict your success. Here's the cool part. You might be wondering, all right, Mickey comes back. He's taken his 50 pictures. Success. Goofy comes back. He did 60. He wanted to compete with Mickey, did it. He was awesome. Donald comes back. He's only taken 3 pictures. He had a major, Donald has his major breakdowns. That's what happened. And it was terrible. It was very graphic. Donald feathers were everywhere. But the cool thing is we learned something. We learned that characters with feathers can't always use the mechanism the right way. We need to give them special feather buttons so it's easier for them to push them, okay? I don't know, just making up a scenario here. You guys are cool for following me on that. So the cool thing about this is even if you don't reach the ideal KPI, is you're going to learn something. We've learned that we're able to make most characters successful. Spare if they have wings, then we have to make that's a different persona. We're going to do something different for that. Going back to a few slides before, when we were talking about titles, there's a sliding scale of product, right? There's everybody from like too much bureaucracy to nothing but data. And there's a rainbow of titles. I think I've had all of them at some point. But the goal is to build with principle. The cool thing about this thing is if you go back to the original statement in the very beginning, if you keep that in your head and the 3 pillars, and you build with principle instead of against your title, you're going to be successful. So keep the principle kind of in the center point. And the other thing is, because there's so much ambiguity, at least for me, it stresses me out a little bit. I'm always looking at other teams and thinking like, oh, they got it right, I got it wrong, I got to be more like them. And I just read this one article over here, and they say to do it this way, and that's got to be right because I just read it. And then I read a different article that says something else. We're a new thing, where there's a ton of things going on out there. But if you let that ambiguity kind of empower you and figure out what shakes out in those pillars and where that happens, you can be kind of empowered by the ambiguity instead of locked down by it. So for example, if I'm in the middle of a user test and I'm just trying to follow either something somebody told me or something I think is right, like I'm only going to get those kinds of results. But if I go back and I think about those pillars and like, what does the user desire? Like, what's that pillar? How do I support that? You might come up with the next article, and then you confuse everybody else your way. Because it's ambiguity, right? Like, there's a lot of space here, and as long as you use those three pillars, you guys get it. Okay. So create what works before replacing. Some executives, I heard this before, they finally saw the light. They want to do this. They're gonna create their own product teams, and then they're kind of looking at their existing team like, who's on the chopping block? Who's going? Because we can't just keep on having Susie in accounting. Like she's gotta learn UX or she's gotta go. Like no, she's supporting the viability, right? She's still figuring out your finances for you. So what I'm trying to say is, if you, not only do titles not matter, but if you use those 3 pillars and product thinking, then you could kind of realign before replacing and erasing everything. You can kind of get it together that way. So, moral of the story is, if we take a graph like this and we shake out some of the 3 pillars from these definitions and we let them fall naturally into their 3 pillars, you're going to have a pretty cool lock salad process, if that makes sense. Cool? Thanks, guys. That's it.
We didn't have a Q&A. Does anyone have any questions about what we saw there today? Maybe we can do it. Maybe we can do it over at Sucks. But if you do have any questions, I mean, we do have 10 minutes, and I don't know if anyone jotted down questions or had any thoughts about what we saw there, but it was great.
Gentlemen, I'm back.
So just a quick thing, was this a real example with Mickey taking portraits, or are you really doing this, or is it just an example you used today?
Mickey currently has no product UX needs that I know of, but I can talk to him and get back to you on that. But no, that was just a fun example, just to use
Because photos is
to color it. Yeah. So yeah, that wasn't a real example. Good question. I'm glad it was so real. You thought that.
Any other questions? I have one.
Shoot.
So, viability, feasibility, desirability.
Mm-hmm.
Introducing these pillars as like core concepts to your team or to product leads, what's the biggest challenge to overcome?
Where on the sliding scale are you exactly? Because like if you're already like bought in, then they kind of get it. But if you're on the other side, it's politics and bureaucracy.
Let's say bought in, because that's a topic in and of itself. which
Right.
we're talking about.
Sure.
But let's say bought in, but maybe need help actually executing on implementing these pillars into the daily grind, so to speak.
So I personally have had a lot of learning experiences attempting to cultivate a UX culture. And one of the things I harp on myself on over and over again is that your first user are your peers, your coworkers, your bosses, the managers you hate because they don't get it. You have to kind of empathize with them first to kind of draw some bridges. So I don't know if you picked it up in here, so I'm glad you brought this up. The viability is kind of something that we're not always thinking about. We're thinking about what the user wants, not like whether they'll actually buy it or it's the company's strategy or like maybe our boss who's pushing back actually his job is on the line for something and he's really nervous about you messing this up or whatever it is. Like there's probably something that they're not a bad person. Like they're probably actually coming from a good place and what makes sense. And if you think about, again, like that empathy map, we're all UX people. Like Matt loves empathy. And I think that's one of your successes here is that you were able to drive that because you have so much empathy. We need a lot of empathy to start cultivating that kind of empathetic culture, right? So one of the things I think I messed up, just personally, that if I could go back, I would do again, is remember that my first user is the people pushing back on me and trying to figure out why that is. And actually, you can even practice doing your little interviews with them. Like you probably go to lunch or see them on the side, like ask them some usability questions. Like, I don't know, why aren't we going anywhere? Like, what is your day-to-day like? What's kind of on the line for you in this, if they're able to talk about that? But kind of get down to the bottom, like kind of try and connect. And then, I don't know, that's a start, right? Is always trying to connect.
So you say empathy. What happens when you have multiple product owners, all with different agendas, especially when money's involved?
Yeah. Very good question. So yeah, I think when we generally think about empathy, we're like one-on-one connecting in that sense. I'm more talking about that pillar and thinking about like what those different directors are, where they're coming from, what's on the line for them. Like if money is on the line, just that's a good thing to know right there, right? Is trying to figure out how much money that is. And if it's a lot, then know that they're probably going to be they're going to push back on you. So for example, I've been on a story before where we developed this really cool design. It was a great iteration. We're moving forward. We have lots of time to iterate on it, which sometimes is bad. And by the end of the iteration, we went from this really cool design to a bunch of sterile white boxes. Has anyone ever occurred? This is kind of a common thread. But this happens, right? Because people get scared. They say that's really cool at first because they have an emotional response. We connected there, but we didn't think about, like, if we're gonna have 50 more conversations about this cool new trick that we're gonna do, then by the time it gets down to this conversation with this person who's concerned about the financial aspect, and this person's concerned about legality, and this person's concerned about the financial part of it. By the time all of those concerns are brought up, you're back to your white box, right? But if you know that, you can kind of start a conversation towards like, I hear you, I understand that concept, but like maybe find a happy medium. Like, can we do it this way? And I find that kind of starts building those bridges.
So KPIs are really awesome, but they're only as good as they're only good if they measure the right things. So what's your process in figuring out the right KPIs to measure for your pages?
Good strategy. So strategy, right, isn't really, unless we're tasked with that, isn't really part of our job. Our job is like somebody gives us strategy, and then that's kind of our map of where we're going. And without that map, you're kind of flying blind, right? And that's, I think, what you're getting at. So without that strategy, it's super hard. One piece of advice I think would work, and all of this advice, funny enough, is probably coming from me thinking about things like, I probably should have did that. So when you do this, try and come up with like where you envision, because if they're not giving you one, hey, it's a fun game, right? Try and envision where that company or product is going, draw kind of your own map, and do your best. Come up with a goal that you think might be fun to hit, like play house, you know? Like kind of use that as your own personal challenge of like, where would I kind of want that? And then you're not just the puzzle, now you're also the piece, and you have to combine those together. So take your best shot, I guess.
Would you base that information off of analytics?
Oh yeah. You base it on whatever data you can get a hold on, for sure.
So it's completely dependent on having good analytics, for the most part.
It's based on a lot, right? Strategy is also based on analytics. It's based on whatever data you can get a hold of, for sure. Good point.
Hi. So
Hey.
you sort of touched upon the conflict between viability and desirability.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really interesting that we do have these this paradigm. What would you say is your process for when the direction you're going may have a conflict between feasibility and desirability?
Now there's a lot of different ways to think about it. I think I've heard it called a number of things, but typically there is going to be a question of feasibility. And it's an important pillar. It's one of the three. So what I would say is try to say, because once you know what the answer is, once you know this is what we're going to build X. Well, now you need somebody to build it, and maybe you're given like one little dude over here, and all of it's on his shoulders. Come up with the core, what is the answer, and then have him do a prototype of it to test its viability and feasibility. Because if all you're feasibly able to do is a proof of concept, go prove that concept, and then you'll probably be given more resources to go from there. Start real small. You usually build like a rocket ship, unless you are. And then, but you're usually starting with a skateboard, and then you kind of graduate to a bike, and then maybe a motorcycle, then a car, but you don't start with the car, right? You kind of start small anyway.
For anybody that missed that joke, Christian works at NASA.
Shout out.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the talk.
Sure.
This might seem like a dumb question, but you mentioned that you've been in the entire scale from companies that were really accepting of it and companies that were not. So in all of this experience, have you ever been in a place or have an experience where all of those key pillars matched, where you have viability, desirability, and feasibility, and still the product failed to take off like you expected it to?
Sorry, repeat the question again?
Would you say that the pillars are why those three comprehensive? Is there anything that might, even if you know all of this, and even if you have all of this, you still might not get the KPIs that you want?
Good question. So there's a huge asterisk to the whole thing, which is you're probably not going to hit it out of the park right away. But if you're doing the right processes and you're pulling the right data, you'll know why, which arguably is more important, because then you know for next time, don't do that. Do the other thing. And one of the cool things is if you have those three pillars, you probably already have acceptance of that like fault in the system, right? Because they know that if you're going to that extreme, your real job is to collect data and figure out why, and just keep asking that kind of questioning. So a lot of people who have processes down also have kind of a deliverable like offshoot process as well, where they're collecting data of asking those questions of why. So there's also kind of a delivery mechanism to collect the whys too. Good question.
Awesome. Let's give Gene a big round of applause.
Thanks, guys.